Welcome to the Primo's Musings podcast.
Good afternoon. Hi, Dan. How are you doing?
Doing great. Good afternoon.
All right. I think the reason why we are usually here, it's usually when there's like a Grand Slam in tennis or we have a golf tournament. But I think we're going right here to celebrate one of the greatest tennis players in tennis, Rafael Nadal, who retired after the Spanish team bowed out to the Davis Cup. So here we are retiring. I'll set the quick stage for the some stats here. 22 Grand Slams, second only to I would call the GOAT, the Novak Djokovic, 24 for the most in the men's singles history. 14 French Open titles, which is the record for the most titles of any Grand Slam tournament. Two Australians. I think he got two Wimbledons and four U.S. Opens, and then he's got a lot of Masters 1,000 titles, 36, which is like tied with Djokovic, and two Olympic gold medals, and then five Davis Cup titles with Spain, and then year-ending rank five times that he ended the year as thing, and he completed the Golden Slam. So that's I could go list out all the Nadal's accolades, but I wanted to give your initial thoughts on that before we dive into some of the things that we can talk about, some great matches or some we can do some trivia as well.
Yeah, so I think like your stats kind of say it all. A few other, I was looking over all the stats. I basically have the same. Made some notes, same key stats that you had. A couple other things that just kind of really make you say wow. So he had at one point in his career for his career wins on clay. He at one point had a streak with 81 straight wins on clay. So 81 match winning streak on clay at one point in his career. That's like a stat that you would, UConn women's going back, 5-6 years when they, or UCLA men's basketball back in the 60s when they would put up 85 straight wins. That kind of number just blows you away. So 81 straight wins on clay. Let's see what else. So his career French Open record, this is kind of remarkable too, is 112 wins, 4 losses. That's just insane. And then a couple other just key things. He's the third player to surpass 100 million in career winnings, along with the other, Federer, Djokovic. That's partly a function of just, the money purse has increased tremendously in the last, 20 years during their generation of players. And then second Spaniard to win Wimbledon of all time, and the first Spaniard to win the Australian. So just those are a couple other key stats. But yeah, I mean, obviously it goes without saying, one of the great careers of all time, for players that we grew up watching. I mean, he's right up there, top 5 or 6, probably, if you could debate all day on the list where he fits in, is he 3, is he 2, is he 4, but, obviously a top 5 in our generation all time. And yeah, I mean, it's just interesting going back when he first came on the scene many years ago, back in the early 2000s, it probably was. I didn't really know what to think of what his career was going to be. Here was this kid with you remember he wore those baggy white shorts, the long hair, the tank top, with the muscle shirt, we'll call it. And we said, who is this kid? Another Agassi substance, style over substance. What's he going to amount to? We didn't really know what to think of the guy. He had, a lot of flash early on. But then obviously as his career, unraveled and things kind of got underway, you just really got to appreciate the kind of player he was. I mean, he's so physical on the court, consummate grinder, beyond, you call him a backboard, but then a backboard plus with just the ball came back harder and with more spin, and, that topspin would jump up to the player's head on clay courts. So therefore he's unbeatable on the clay surface. And then, when I started going to the U.S. Opens back like in 2017, 18 and getting to see him live, it's just, then you really appreciate just what an amazing talent he is, just watching him grind out these points, these, 25, 30, 35 shot rallies. Like I said, the ball just comes out deeper and harder and with more angle and more spins. Yeah, so that's kind of just a quick overall feeling for his career. You can kind of summarize what you thought about him when you started watching him, and then what how you came to appreciate him over the years.
Yeah, before I go into that, I think this would mark to me the formal end of the big three as we see it, because Federer retired some time back, Nadal retiring, so we will never get to see Djokovic. But Djokovic is still playing, but you'll never get to see the Djokovic versus Federer or Djokovic versus Nadal anymore. So this technically this would be the end of the formal end of the big three. And for both of us who've been and many of us who've been like watching these three just dominate the sport like no one has ever done that. And I grew up with the Borgs and McEnroes and Connors, and then followed with Edbergs and Sampras and Beckers and Agassiz. I've never seen these three players dominate tennis as much as these three. I mean, they would just push each other from time to time, and that's one of the things that when you looked at the tweet that Federer said, he said, "You challenged me in ways no one else could." And he said, "On clay, it felt like I was stepping into your backyard, and you made me work harder than I ever thought I could just hold my ground." And the one thing that he also did was like he made sure that he reimagined the games for Federer at least. And Federer came back and beat him in the Australian Open after that comeback. But Federer had to really rethink his game just playing against Nadal. Federer was dominating the sport, and then came in Nadal, and then came in Djokovic, and then both these guys pushed each other. I mean, they all pushed each other in a very big way. I think as a scrappy old kid, like, as 19, he won the French Open. I think the first time he beat Federer, I think it was in Florida. I think it was in Miami. And Federer was shocked at how the topspin that Nadal hit, the way he could just rally, just the brute strength that he had, the number of revolutions per minute on the topspin, and the way he could slide down and hit a forehand from all the way on the backhand side. I've never seen any player do that. I mean, each player, I mean, one thing you saw about Federer was fluidity and grace. And Djokovic, we all know the way he can move on the baseline. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do that. And then Nadal was just completely different player. And I think for us to see like three different styles of play was just incredible. And especially when all of them played against each other, it was just a matter of one or two adjustment that each one made that won that particular match. So Nadal is just simply was simply amazing. I was a Federer fan growing up, and you are a Djokovic fan. Obviously, I was rooting for Federer against Nadal, but you could not but appreciate how classy Nadal was, even when he lost. And I mean, he had all these 80 SST, that he had a lot of the what do you call it, OCD kind of thing, the way he liked bottles. And I think it's funny, even I think I have to read this tweet from Federer. He said, "I'm not a superstitious person, but you took it to the next level." And he said, "All those rituals, assembling your water bottles like toy soldiers in formation, fixing your hair, adjusting your everything." Just all of it with intensity. Secretly, I kind of loved the whole thing because it was so unique. That's what's coming from Federer. It was so you. So I think they all appreciate each other. I just think that Djokovic now has to add his new. I think we talked about this, right? The new big three, which is the Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, and maybe
Yeah.
we I want to see this now, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so there you go. That's what I thought about Nadal, and I think they're all three players are so much intertwined with each other in the sport. The other thing I did want to quickly talk about was that the two matches which I did want to touch upon. One was the Wimbledon match that was against Federer. It was almost getting dark. That you saw the 2008 was in the twilight, and Nadal took him down. And then the other match I remember, I actually went and watched some of the highlights of the 2012 Australian Open that Djokovic had a 5-hour, 53-minute win, the longest major final of all time. And it was just incredible to watch these two players battle. I mean, both these finals, I just went and watched them just to relive some of the Nadal heroics. I mean, of course, we've seen him destroy Djokovic and Federer at the French Open. That was his backyard. But just looking at two of these matches, one against Federer in 2008, I remember it very vividly, being a Federer fan. And then also the 2012, I don't remember much of that Australian Open, but I went and watched a lot of the recording and highlights. I would strongly encourage our viewers to watch those two.
Yeah, no, that Wimbledon that you're referring to, that was made into like a little documentary or movie. I don't know if it was HBO Sports or ESPN. I do recall watching that special. They made it into a whole like hour production. You know, that was such a
Mhm.
classic match, that Wimbledon duel in that five setter that Nadal won in the fifth set. I think it was 9-7 or 10-8. You know, it went kind of overtime. We'll call it
Nice.
in the
Yep,
fifth
you're
set.
right. Yep.
Yeah. So that was one of the classic matches, and then yeah, I mean, I remember another big match I remember was it was unfortunately Nadal came up on the short side of it, but that match against Federer with Federer's comeback in the Australian Open in
Yes.
2017, I think, right, 17 or
Yep.
18. That was classic match where Nadal I think was up two. I think he was up 2 sets to 1.
No, he was. It was a five. It was a fifth set, and he was
Yeah.
actually up 3-1 in the fifth set, and
Okay.
Federer came back and won it, and it was almost like even the match winning point. I still remember because I was watching it before I went to work, and Federer couldn't believe he hit the line. Nadal challenged it, and the ball clipped the line, and that's how the comeback was completed. So I remember that match very well because that was a comeback. Nadal fell the short end of the stick, but usually Nadal is on the other side of that, where he's actually winning the match against Federer. The Wimbledon was the one that was a signature win that in 2008. I still think that's one of the greatest matches played. But again, I'm very biased. I mean that in which Federer fell the short end of the stick. But when you watch the 2012 Australian Open between Djokovic and Nadal, you will see some of the greatness that would be there as well. Uh, but the other thing with Nadal, he did win two Olympic gold medals, which I think after a very long time, Djokovic won as well. One was in singles that Nadal won in 2008 Beijing. That's something that has eluded Djokovic for a long time. But when I think about Nadal, I've had a chance to read his book. Comes from very humble beginnings, and he still stays in Spain. He didn't want to move outside of Spain, despite Spain having one of the largest taxes that they get on that. And I think he just wants to be. He's still that local Mallorca kid. He didn't want to leave Spain, and he's beloved in Spain, but he's also beloved across the world. And his dominance in clay was just unparalleled. He was very competitive, fierce competitiveness, and he's just transformed it from a Spain to a global icon and inspiration to a lot of them. And his intensity, his forehand, and never give up attitude. I think he was one player that I saw would never give up on any point. And it's something about the greats, right? I mean, something about that. They never give up a single point. I mean, you may be 40-15 down. Djokovic is in the same class as Nadal. I mean, you could see them. They would scrap for every point and come back and win the match. That's, I mean, we're very fortunate to have witnessed these three players, but I do think that it's very sad ending. Of course, it's very interesting, right? Federer played the Lever Cup, lost his final match. Nadal played the Davis Cup, lost the final match, and we'll see what Djokovic's end is going to be. And I don't think it's coming in the next year or so, but I do think that it's coming at some point.
Yeah, there's one more thing to add as far as I've got of the big three. I've been fortunate to see two of them live. Over the years from us going to the U.S. Open, that's where I've seen most of them, and I've seen Djokovic, more than a few occasions, and I've seen back when I first started going to the Open, Rafa, and he played some of the greatest matches I ever saw. Where he played, I think, 2 straight years, either 2 consecutive years or 2 out of 3. He played in a semifinal against Juan Martín del Potro, the Argentine, the big forehand, and that was some of the best tennis I've ever seen live. These like the opening set. There was an opening set in one of the matches that went to a tiebreaker, and I forget if it was who came up on top of that tiebreaker, but I've never seen points like that. Just the two slugging out forehands, just the power, like you mentioned, the RPMs, the spin. It was insane tennis, best tennis I've ever seen live. I think that one set, the opening set, and then after that, it came down a little bit the level, but it was just incredible tennis that one set I saw between those two guys. So that's when I kind of really started to grow a bigger appreciation for Nadal, was seeing him live and just the way his style of play out there, and just the power and the grit and the way he just makes you fight for every point. So just remarkable. What a career, and yeah, wish him the best to him.
Yeah, I absolutely think. And there is one more stat I just saw, which I just blew my mind. That was actually in I do think it was a French Open, I believe. And I found this stat, which was just incredible. Most consecutive sets won on a single surface. It's 50 on clay. That's just, I mean, just even at amateur level, this is just incredible at the professional level to win the number of consecutive sets on a single surface. That is just, it blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. Like, how dominant he was on clay. And a lot of people kind of, this is where, I think we've all been guilty of that, which is when you win 14 French Opens, and the first narrative that is that, well, he's not as good as on grass, or he's not as good as an French in Australian Open or the U.S. Open. But what people don't realize is that even to dominate, and I think you listed out this like 116-3 or 117-3 record of the French Open, the fact that you can dominate a particular surface for that long, and when you see the number of players that have come over the 20-year span who could also be good on clay, who also come from different countries who are playing on clay, and that's the amazing thing about Nadal, his complete domination of one surface, that they should not discount what he was not on other surfaces. And that's I mean, unfortunately, that's the way we live in. That's the world we live in sometimes. But I do think that we've all been guilty of it. And I think it's actually very unfair to the greatness of Nadal. And I definitely think, and the other stat that really was amazing was he actually won one Grand Slam title for 10 consecutive years from 2005 to 2014, and then 15 years, which is like 2005 to 2020 and 22. And that's just incredible in like 20 years that we win one every year you play. And that's not easy to do, no matter how great you are.
Yeah, and then to your point about how his critics might say that, oh, he won of his 22 Grand Slams, he won 14 on clay, and you can't consider him one of the greatest players because of that. Well, think of it. So 14 of the 22 were on clay. That means 8 were not. So where does 8 rank him among the all-time greats? Probably still on the top 5 list. Top maybe I don't know, top 8, top 9.
Oh, McEnroe won 7, I believe.
Right.
So, I mean, McEnroe is considered one of the greats from a U.S. standpoint. So
Right.
that still beats.
So yeah,
Well,
he's he's in the Hall of Fame. He's still one of the top 10 all time on the numbers list for Grand Slams, probably. So look at it that way. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know we have any? But before I do, well, I did want to cover one part of it, and we both called it. Nadal was always a classy sportsman, and everybody associates class with Federer because he was always that classy player, losing that. But one thing was that he was always polite to his opponents, respectful to the game, and he was very humble, never gloated, graceful in loss and triumph. He would occasionally would argue with the umpire, but his more thing was more like the stare that he would give the umpire. So more in terms of like showing something rather than actually yelling at the referee or throwing all kind of tantrums. And I do think that this is something that I heard, and I think I should verify that. I don't think he's ever broken a racket ever since I've seen him play. And I think that's something that he attributes to his uncle, Tony Nadal. I mean, I think we have to mention that. I mean, if it was not for his uncle who coached him for many, many years, we would have never seen the resurgence of Nadal. And while they separated ways towards the end of his career, I'm sure that without Tony Nadal, Nadal is, established himself one of the greats, but Tony was a very big part of sometimes it's the team that's also part of that, which is very important, right? And that's what it is about Nadal. So do we, and I did want to touch upon one other thing because once there's another Spanish player who's coming up the ranks who plays kind of differently, but we can talk about that a little bit. But do you have any trivias or things like that we want to show for Mr. Pisat?
That's right. We got to give a shout out to our buddies. 2 questions. So yeah. So basically, the first trivia question would be, so as we know, he won 22 Grand Slams, and I believe he got to 30. I'm guessing he got to 30 finals. So he lost in maybe 8 or 9 different finals, Grand Slam finals. So I was looking at who his opponents were in the finals where he lost, and so the question would be, who was his only loss in a Grand Slam final where he did not lose to Federer or Djokovic. So he had 8 or 9 losses.
Yeah, got it.
Every loss was either to the big 3, except for there was one Grand Slam final where he did not lose to one of the big 3. So
wow,
that's a tough one.
That's a good
5-star.
one. Okay.
5-star.
All right, so I may need some help, but you know what? I want to guess on my own. Del Potro is one name that came to me because I think what?
It's a good guess, but it's not. He lost in a semi, I believe, to him.
He lost in semi, right? I think because I think when I look at like who else could have won during that span when these 3 were dominating.
This kind of speaks to the domination of the big 3 also, because that's if he only lost to one other guy, those 3 were always in the finals almost.
Murray?
It's a good
Andy
guess,
Murray?
not the answer either. No, this guy is he's from the same country as Federer. This gentleman, this same country.
Stan Wawrinka.
Yeah.
Stan the man. Okay, that
There.
was easy. I mean, that was
2014
too easy.
Australian Open, 2014 Aussie. So that was the answer to
Okay,
that question.
all right.
And the
Yeah,
other
Stan
question
also.
is this is a little easier, I think. So just since you mentioned you started referencing the career slam and golden slam. So I'm just talking career grand slam. So just for players who have won the career grand slam, we know the big three have won the career grand slam. So who was the one other player who's won the career grand slam? We'll say since the Open era, since post Laver. I'm not going back to like Laver, Budge, Nastase. Starting with the Laver era. Who's the only other player besides the big three who has won a career grand slam?
In the men or women?
Men. I'm sorry,
Okay,
men's.
just the
Yeah.
men. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, because I know
Yeah.
it was much easier. Among the men, the career, I was thinking Agassi.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Sampras never won the French, so Sampras.
Yes, exactly.
never won the
The only
French.
other person was Agassi. Yes.
And Lendl might have been. Lendl's never won Wimbledon, as we know, right? I think Lendl's won everything else, but never.
I think the only time he lost the Wimbledon was to Pat Cash, and I
Yeah,
remember that final very well, watching it in India.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, he's been apparently playing a lot of pickleball. So hopefully, we'll get a chance to play against Lendl if our buddy Josh gets us into the group there. But no, but I think this was good in terms of that, and I'm sure there will be time for Djokovic. I was actually going to write a blog on Nadal as well, because I did write one for Federer when he retired. So I'm just thinking about all the things I could write for Nadal. And Nadal is something that I rooted against because of the way, like when you are rooting for a player like a Federer, I think you do. But I think both of us, like we talked about, like just like many others, we've started to really appreciate the greatness of Nadal, and rightfully so. So it's a tip to the King of Mallorca, you can call him, or the King of Clay that he was also called as. But it's going to be sad not seeing Nadal in his prime on the court anymore. I'm hoping maybe in a future Laver Cup, you'll probably see him in an exhibition match, maybe him and Federer for good time's sake, and then Djokovic playing there too. But until then, it is. And I think I don't want to discount Andy Murray too, because that's something that, and I think I sent you this thing, and I want to confirm if it's true that if Murray is going to indeed coach Djokovic, and I don't know if
Right.
it's, yeah, so it's going to be interesting. But today's podcast was all on Nadal and the lefty, the brute force lefty with class finally hangs up his boots, and Spain also crashes out of the Davis Cup. And there's one guy who is right there who wanted to play with him, who grew up idolizing him. Um, uh, that was Carlos Alcaraz. But right now, the player to beat right now, even though Alcaraz has four, it's Sinner, and Sinner would be chomping at the bits. I almost see this rivalry as Federer took a head start, followed by Nadal and Djokovic. They came and surpassed him, and Carlos Alcaraz took a head start. Can Sinner overtake him? And you need another new big three for that, right? Because Federer, again, Djokovic will be done in about a couple of years, maybe 3 years, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. He can still play. I might be wrong about that. Djokovic has always proved to be, someone who can you can never question. We'll see about that.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
This is great, Dan, and I'm sure that once the winter, I think we can still talk about college sports. There's still college football playoffs coming in. We have the NFL going on in full force. Then the Australian Open will start in January. So there's still a lot of sports coming down. But I think the next one I think I'm thinking about would be a college NCAA football playoffs. I think that'll be fun to watch, I think.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
With that, we wrap up the Nadal special. Thanks again for listening. Just hold on a bit while I stop the recording.
Thanks for listening. Primo and Dan will be back soon.